Mark's day began like every other, as the proud owner of a small logistics business. His warehouse was more than just a storage facility. It was the heart of everything he had worked tirelessly to build over the years. Nestled on the outskirts of a suburban neighborhood, Mark's pride and joy boasted a spacious parking lot, a perfect setting to accommodate delivery trucks, employee vehicles, and his personal car. Little did he know, the routine day would quickly spiral into a full-blown conflict that would challenge his resolve and force him to stand up for what was right. As he pulled into the lot that fateful morning, he was met with an unsettling sight. The lot, usually pristine and orderly, was teeming with unfamiliar vehicles. Sedans, SUVs, and even a minivan were parked haphazardly in spaces explicitly marked as private property. Mark's brow furrowed as he initially assumed there must be a simple explanation. Perhaps a nearby event had drawn an unusual crowd or someone was experiencing an emergency. But as he drove deeper into the lot, a growing irritation welled within him. Every space was occupied, leaving no room for his staff or deliveries. A delivery truck sat idling awkwardly at the entrance, unable to proceed. Mark's frustration peaked as he parked his car on the curb and stepped out, determined to investigate the situation. He walked through the lot, inspecting the vehicles closely. None bore any indication that they were connected to his business. Instead, several had stickers from the nearby residential community, an area managed by a homeowners association that Mark had only sparingly interacted with. He quickly pulled out his phone and called his assistant, Karen. "Karen, did someone authorize parking in our lot for an event or something?" he asked, his tone sharp. "No, Mark," she replied. "I was wondering the same thing. A few of the guys are already complaining about not finding spaces, and we've got deliveries coming in today." Mark sighed heavily, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. "Let me figure this out. I'll call you back." Determined to address the issue head-on, Mark decided to visit the Homeowners Association office nearby. It was a short walk into the neighborhood, and he hoped that by speaking to someone in authority, he could resolve the matter swiftly. As he approached the community center, Mark couldn't help but notice the pristine surroundings: flower beds meticulously kept, freshly painted fences, and well-paved roads. It was clear that the Homeowners Association had the funds to maintain their appearance, but that didn't ease the frustration boiling within him. Inside, he was greeted by a receptionist who smiled politely, seemingly unaware of the chaos her organization had unleashed. "I need to speak to someone in charge," Mark said curtly, frustration evident in his voice. "There's an issue with my warehouse parking lot." The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, sir. Let me see if Miss Langston, our Homeowners Association president, is available." After a few minutes of waiting in a sterile yet beautifully decorated office, Mark found himself sitting across from Miss Langston. She was a poised woman in her late 40s, exuding an air of authority that he found immediately irritating. Listening intently as he explained the situation, her expression remained impassive. "I'm sorry to hear about the inconvenience," she said finally, "but we had to find a solution for our residents. Parking in the community is limited, and your lot was sitting unused most of the time. We decided it would be a good overflow option." Mark stared at her incredulously, rage boiling just beneath the surface. "You decided without asking me. That's private property. You can't just tell people they can park there." Miss Langston's tone hardened as she countered, "The Homeowners Association has the authority to make decisions for the community's benefit. Your lot is adjacent to our neighborhood, and it seemed like a logical choice." "Logical choice?" Mark seethed. "This is trespassing. My business relies on that lot. Trucks can't even get in right now because of the cars your residents left there. You didn't even ask me." With a dismissive wave of her hand, Miss Langston replied, "We assumed you wouldn't mind since it wasn't being fully utilized." Mark leaned forward, his voice firm and unwavering. "Do mind. I'm giving you 48 hours to notify your residents and clear the lot. After that, I'll take action." Her expression darkened. "Mr. Cruz, I suggest you think carefully before escalating this. The Homeowners Association has resources, and we're acting within our rights." Mark clenched his fists, frustration boiling over as he stood abruptly. "You're not within your rights, and I'll prove it." Storming out of the community center, Mark felt a mixture of disbelief and fury. How could the homeowners association justify such blatant overreach? Returning to his warehouse, he found Karen and the rest of the staff waiting for an update. "They're claiming they have the authority to use our lot," Mark explained, voice still heated. "But they don't. I'm giving them 48 hours to fix this, and if they don't, we're towing every single car." Karen nodded in agreement. "But this is ridiculous." Over the next 2 days, Mark remained vigilant as he watched cars continue to fill his lot. He saw residents casually coming and going, some even waving at him as if the situation were perfectly normal. It infuriated him. Despite his warnings, it was clear the homeowners association had no intention of complying. On the second evening, Mark noticed even more vehicles than before, some parked carelessly enough to obstruct access to his warehouse doors. It was the final straw. He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer, wanting to ensure every step he took would be airtight legally. After discussing his options, he decided to post signs around the lot and prepare to tow the vehicles. The signs, printed in bold letters, read, "No parking. Private property. Violators will be towed at owner's expense." Mark installed them himself, placing them at every entrance to the lot. He took photos of the signs in place, ensuring he had evidence in case the homeowners association tried to dispute his actions. As night fell, he slept restlessly, knowing the next day would be pivotal. The morning of the towing operation began early for Mark. He arrived at the warehouse before sunrise, feeling a mix of apprehension and determination. The parking lot was as packed as ever, a sea of vehicles representing the blatant disregard for his property rights. Today, however, would mark the end of the homeowners association's overreach. The towing company arrived promptly at 7 a.m. as promised. The lead driver, a stocky man named Dave, greeted Mark with a firm handshake. "You weren't kidding about this being a mess," Dave said, gesturing toward the crowded lot. "We've got a team of 4 trucks ready to go. You've got the documentation handy." Mark handed over a folder containing all the necessary paperwork: the property deed, photos of the posted no parking signs, and the certified letter he had sent to the homeowners association. Dave reviewed the documents quickly, nodding in approval. "Looks solid. We'll start with the cars blocking your warehouse doors and work our way out." Mark watched as the towing crew got to work. The sound of engines starting and chains clanking filled the air as one car after another was lifted onto the tow trucks. It was a surprisingly efficient process. Within the first hour, half a dozen vehicles had already been removed. Each time a car was towed, Dave meticulously documented the process, snapping photos of the vehicle position and the surrounding signage. Mark appreciated the attention to detail. He wanted no room for the homeowners association to claim this had been done improperly. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the neighborhood began to stir. Residents started emerging from their homes, some walking their dogs or heading to work. It didn't take long for them to notice the tow trucks. A woman in a bathrobe, clutching a mug of coffee, was the first to approach. Her face twisted in confusion as she stared at the empty spaces where cars had once been parked. "What's going on here?" she demanded, marching up to Mark. "This is private property," Mark replied calmly. "The homeowners association had no right to tell residents they could park here. I've given plenty of warnings, and now I'm enforcing my rights." The woman's face reddened with anger. "My husband's car is gone. He needs it to get to work. You can't just tow people like this." Mark held his ground. "I gave the homeowners association 2 days to resolve this. They chose to ignore me. If you want your car back, you'll need to contact the towing company." Without missing a beat, she huffed and stormed away, muttering something under her breath. Within minutes, more residents began arriving, some still in their pajamas, others dressed for the day ahead. The scene turned chaotic as people realized their cars were missing. Voices were raised, accusations were hurled, and a small crowd formed near the lot's entrance. Mark remained calm, knowing he had prepared for this. He had even printed flyers with the towing company's contact information, detailing how residents could retrieve their vehicles. Karen arrived around 8 a.m., and he asked her to help hand out the flyers to the residents. "Don't engage with them," Mark warned her. "Just give them the information they need and walk away." Despite the escalating tension, the towing operation continued. By mid-morning, nearly all the unauthorized vehicles had been removed, leaving the lot finally clear. Mark felt a wave of relief wash over him as he observed the empty spaces, a stark contrast to the chaos of the past week. Delivery trucks could now access the loading dock, and his employees could park without issue. It was a victory, but one that came at a cost. Just as Mark began to think the worst was over, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the lot. Miss Langston, flanked by two other board members, her expression a mixture of outrage and indignation. "Mr. Cruz," she called out, her voice sharp. "What is the meaning of this? You had no right to tow our residents' vehicles." Mark turned to face her, his expression resolute. "I had every right. This is private property, and I made it clear from the beginning that your residents were trespassing. I gave you 2 days to resolve this, and you did nothing." Miss Langston's cheeks flushed with anger. "This is unacceptable. You're going to regret this. The Homeowners Association has resources, and we will take legal action if necessary." Mark crossed his arms defiantly. "Go ahead. I've documented everything, and I followed the law to the letter. If anyone is in the wrong here, it's the Homeowners Association for misleading residents and ignoring my warnings." One of the board members attempted to defuse the situation. "Let's not escalate this further," he said, glancing nervously between Mark and Miss Langston. "Surely we can come to some sort of arrangement." "There's no arrangement to be made," Mark replied firmly. "The lot is off-limits to your residents effective immediately. If I see another car here, it will be towed. End of discussion." Miss Langston opened her mouth to argue but seemed to think better of it. With a huff, she turned on her heel and marched back toward the neighborhood, her entourage following closely behind. As the day progressed, the chaos gradually subsided. Residents trickled away, some muttering angrily, others resigned to the situation. Mark felt vindicated but also a lingering unease. He knew this wasn't the end of the conflict. The Homeowners Association would likely retaliate in some form. By late afternoon, the warehouse lot was back to normal. Employees parked without issue, deliveries were made on time, and the business hummed along as it should. Mark couldn't help but feel a swelling pride in how he had handled the situation. He had faced down an overreaching homeowners association and reclaimed what was rightfully his. As he locked up the warehouse that evening, Mark took one last look at the empty lot. It was a small victory but felt significant. Whatever the homeowners association threw at him next, he would be ready. The day after the towing incident was calm on the surface, but Mark knew better than to assume the battle was over. The empty parking lot at his warehouse served as a small island of peace amidst the brewing storm. While his employees and deliveries were back to operating smoothly, Mark couldn't ignore the palpable tension lingering in the air. The Homeowners Association's audacity to use his property without consent had already tested his patience, and he suspected their retaliation was only beginning. Mark's suspicions were confirmed later that afternoon when Karen walked into his office holding an envelope. "This came for you," she said, placing it on his desk, her tone carrying a hint of unease. Mark opened the envelope and scanned its contents. It was a formal letter from the Homeowners Association, signed by none other than Miss Langston. The letter accused Mark of causing undue hardship to the community and claimed that his actions had disrupted the lives of multiple residents. It threatened legal action, demanding that he cease towing vehicles and negotiate to reintegrate his lot as part of the community's parking solution. Letting out a frustrated sigh, Mark placed the letter on his desk. He couldn't decide whether to laugh at the Homeowners Association's sheer nerve or feel infuriated by their ongoing overreach. Picking up his phone, he called his lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, who had been advising him throughout the ordeal. Jacobs, I just got a letter from the Homeowners Association, Mark began, reading through the letter's key points. They're threatening to sue me for towing the cars. Jacobs chuckled dryly on the other end. That's typical Homeowners Association behavior. Bluster and intimidation. They don't have a legal leg to stand on. You documented everything, right? Every step, Mark confirmed. Photos, videos, the certified letter. I even posted no parking signs before towing. They're just trying to scare you, Jacobs assured him. Let me draft a response. We'll make it clear that you're within your rights and that any legal action on their part would be baseless. In the meantime, keep documenting everything. If they try anything else, we'll be ready. Mark hung up, feeling reassured but still wary. He had expected resistance from the Homeowners Association, but their persistence was exhausting. Spending the rest of the day focused on his business, he tried to push the situation from his mind. Yet, as the hours passed, his phone buzzed with messages from frustrated residents and even a few veiled threats from anonymous numbers. It was clear some people were taking the Homeowners Association's side. By evening, Mark decided to address the situation head-on. He logged onto the Homeowners Association's community forum, a platform residents used for communication, and posted a clear statement. He explained the events leading up to the towing, emphasizing that he had given the Homeowners Association ample notice and had acted entirely within his legal rights. He included photos of the posted signs and the letters sent to Miss Langston, leaving no room for doubt about his actions. The post garnered immediate attention, with comments flooding in. Some residents expressed outrage, accusing Mark of selfishness and unwillingness to support the community, while others criticized the Homeowners Association for overstepping its boundaries and creating the problem in the first place. Debate ensued, tempers flaring on both sides. One comment stood out to Mark, a message from a man named Richard, who identified himself as a fellow business owner in the area. Mark, I've dealt with this Homeowners Association before, Richard wrote. They tried to pull the same stunt with my lot a few years ago. Don't back down. They rely on intimidation to get their way. Feeling a surge of validation, Mark replied to Richard, asking for details about his experience. They exchanged contact information and later that day spoke on the phone. They're bullies, Richard explained. They assume most people don't have the time or resources to fight back, so they push until they get what they want. When I refused to let them use my property, they tried to fine me through some bogus community ordinance. It didn't hold up in court, but it was a hassle. Mark listened carefully, taking mental notes of Richard's advice. Stay firm, document everything, and don't let the Homeowners Association dictate the terms, Richard added. Inspired by Richard's experience, Mark prepared for the possibility of legal action, even if it seemed unlikely to progress very far. The next morning, Mark arrived at the warehouse to find small flyers taped to the walls and light posts around his property. The flyers bore the Homeowners Association's logo and contained a scathing message accusing him of endangering community harmony and refusing to collaborate. They urged residents to boycott his business and pressure him into compliance. Mark ripped one of the flyers from the wall, anger flaring in his chest. This was no longer just about parking, it was a targeted smear campaign. He immediately called Karen, asking her to gather all the flyers around the property. Once he had them in hand, he took photos and emailed them to Jacobs. Can they do this? Mark asked when Jacobs called him back. Legally. No, Jacobs replied. This could be considered defamation, especially if it damages your business. We can send a cease and desist letter, but you'll need to document any financial losses caused by this. Mark felt a mix of frustration and determination. The Homeowners Association was clearly escalating the conflict, but he wasn't about to back down. He spent the rest of the day filing a formal complaint with the local government, outlining the Homeowners Association's actions and their impact on his business. He also contacted a public relations consultant to help him craft a statement for the media, anticipating that the story might gain attention beyond the community. By the end of the week, the tension had reached a boiling point. News of the dispute had spread throughout the neighborhood, dividing residents into two camps, those who supported Mark's stance and those who sided with the homeowners association. One afternoon, Mark received an unexpected call from a local journalist who had caught wind of the dispute. Rachel, the journalist, was investigating claims of overreach by several homeowners associations in the area and wanted to interview Mark about his experience. Initially hesitant, Mark realized that publicizing the situation could shed light on the homeowners association's behavior and potentially deter them from further action. During the interview, Mark recounted the events calmly and factually. How the homeowners association had overstepped its boundaries, the impact it had on his business, and the steps he had taken to resolve the matter legally. Rachel asked pointed questions about the residents' reactions and whether Mark felt any remorse for towing the cars. "I did what I had to do to protect my property and my business," Mark said firmly. "I gave the homeowners association every opportunity to resolve this amicably, but they chose to ignore me. My actions were legal and necessary. If anything, this situation highlights the dangers of unchecked homeowners association power." A week later, the article was published, accompanied by photos of Mark's warehouse and the infamous parking lot. The headline read, "Homeowners Association Overreaches, Sparks Legal Battle Over Private Property Rights." The story gained traction quickly, with readers commenting on similar experiences with their own homeowners associations. Some criticized Mark, but the overwhelming majority supported him, calling the homeowners association's actions an abuse of power. The publicity put additional pressure on the homeowners association. Miss Langston, who had previously dismissed Mark's warnings, now found herself under scrutiny, not only from the community but also from local officials who had been alerted to the situation. The homeowners association's tactics were being questioned, and their reputation took a significant hit. Amidst the fallout, Mark received an invitation to attend the next homeowners association board meeting. At first, he was reluctant, suspecting it might be another attempt to strong-arm him into compliance. However, Jacobs advised him to attend, viewing it as an opportunity to assert his position publicly and on the record. The meeting was held in the community center, and Mark arrived early, determined to remain composed no matter what unfolded. The room quickly filled with residents, many of whom appeared visibly agitated. Miss Langston sat at the head of the table, flanked by other board members who looked equally tense. After the usual procedural matters, the floor was opened to discuss the parking dispute. Miss Langston began with a statement framing the homeowners association's actions as an attempt to address a pressing community issue. She painted Mark as uncooperative and unwilling to compromise, a characterization that drew murmurs from the audience. When it was his turn to speak, Mark rose from his seat, allowing the tension to linger as he gathered his thoughts. This was never about being uncooperative. He addressed the room, his voice steady and measured. This was about standing up for my property and my business. The homeowners association acted without my consent, misled residents into thinking they had a right to park on private property, and ignored my repeated attempts to resolve the issue amicably. I'm not the villain here. A silence fell over the room before a few residents began to clap in support. Emboldened, Mark continued, "I'm not against the community. I understand the parking issue is frustrating, but the solution isn't to trample over someone else's rights. There are better ways to address this, ways that respect everyone involved." The applause grew louder as the momentum shifted. Miss Langston's expression hardened. She attempted to regain control of the meeting, but several residents began voicing their own frustrations with the homeowners association, accusing the board of acting without transparency and prioritizing their interests over the community. One resident, an older man named Mr. Davis, stood up to address the board. "This isn't the first time the homeowners association has overstepped. It's time for some accountability. We need new leadership, people who actually listen to the residents." The meeting devolved into a heated debate, with calls for Miss Langston to step down. Mark stayed quiet, observing the townsfolk's discontent bubble over. By the end of the night, it was clear that the parking dispute had exposed deeper issues within the community. A few days later, Mark received an email from one of the board members. It was a formal apology acknowledging the Homeowners Association's mishandling of the situation and promising to revise their policies to prevent similar incidents in the future. Miss Langston, it turned out, had resigned from her position, and new elections were being planned. Mark's resolution was bittersweet. He had won the battle, but it had come at the cost of strained relationships with some residents. Still, he felt a sense of pride in standing his ground and forcing the Homeowners Association to confront its flaws. As he stood once more in the now empty parking lot of his warehouse, Mark reflected on the ordeal. This experience had been exhausting, but it had also taught him the importance of perseverance and the value of asserting one's rights. The lot, once a symbol of conflict, now felt like a quiet victory, a reminder that sometimes fighting back is the only way to ensure fairness and respect. With a renewed sense of determination, Mark returned to his office, ready to move forward with his business. Despite the scars of battle, he would ensure that his warehouse remained a bastion of legitimacy and a statement of whatever challenges awaited him. Whatever the Homeowners Association might throw at him next, Mark was ready to face it head-on, knowing that protecting one's rights was worth every ounce of effort it took.